In this next news story, a heartless man who enslaved a woman and forced her to work on the streets of Manchester filmed himself dancing with a stack of cash and flicking it towards the camera like a baller. Jean Marinel Mihai was jailed this week for 10 years after pleading guilty to modern slavery and exploitation. A court heard he made at least £100,000 whilst he forced the woman into working the streets of Manchester every night. Following his sentencing, footage had been released by Greater Manchester Police showing the 29-year-old dancing around while he flashed the notes to their camera. He was dancing in front of his pal and he was just throwing the money in the air like he didn't care. Manchester Crown Court heard how the victim was trafficked into the country from Romania, flying to Liverpool with Mihai with a promise of a better life. Mihai hid that he knew the woman in order to avoid raising suspicions of airport staff. Upon arrival, she was placed in a guest house and put to work on the streets of Cheetham Hill and Strangeways areas. The judge, Rachel Smith, at Manchester Crown Court said she didn't know what she was doing, where she was going, except she was being moved to the UK to make money for Mr. Mihai to work the streets. The judge said of Mihai, he took all of her money, he assaulted her on a number of occasions, she was frightened on it because there were occasions of physical violence. Mr. Mihai would ring her every day to check up on whether she was working and how much money she was earning. He wouldn't even give her any breaks. Mihai's former girlfriend, Florentina Yomez, was also jailed. She was jailed for 6 years after the court heard she was also previously controlling the victim when she was working the streets of Romania. When the woman later received support from a charity, Yomez was then involved in kidnapping her so she could continue to be exploited. The victim was in the Strangeways area when a black SUV pulled up beside her. The mother of three, Yomez, got out of the car and physically assaulted her, causing the woman to fall to the floor. She was forced into the car and was kidnapped, and two men were in the front passenger and driver's seat. She was then driven to a house in Derbyshire, which was described as another place in order for her to continue to be exploited, the prosecutor said. The prosecutor said that the victim was treated as little more than a money-making asset. The prosecutor said, you knew what she looked like. You would be able to speak to her on the street. The kidnapping was pre-planned. You and the two men in the car had travelled from the Midlands. She was frightened of you. The judge said, the woman was vulnerable and you knew that. You knew she was being kidnapped to be handed over from one exploitative man to another, to be enslaved within the streets. So it's believed that the woman said she would have to deal with up to 10 men on any single night. Mihai pleaded guilty to requiring a person to perform forced or compulsory labour and arranging or facilitating the travel of another person with a view to exploitation. Mihai was sentenced to 10 years in prison, as I said, while Yomez was sentenced to 6 years. Detective Inspector Tony Platten, the senior investigating officer at Greater Manchester Police, said, I would like to commend the survivor for her incredible strength throughout this entire process and for trusting us and our partners to get justice. She endured years of abuse and coercion by this group, forced to live in unimaginable conditions for so much of her life. They took extraordinary measures to conceal their illicit operation, but I am glad today to see that they will now face a considerable time behind bars before they will be deported by our immigration colleagues. It is only through the support of partners like MASH and Justice and Care that the survivor had the opportunity to be supported and rebuild a life which has taken from her for so many years. In cases like this, we have seen victims threatened and suffering extreme violence at the criminals exert control. That's why tackling modern-day slavery is a high priority for Greater Manchester Police, and dedicated partners were embedded into our teams to ensure victims receive the very best care and support available and are safeguarded throughout. Modern-day slavery is happening right here in Manchester, and we need the public and professionals to be aware of the signs. So the court heard a statement on behalf of the victim, which was given by a support worker, and they said, when I first began to work with her, she was like an empty shell. She seemed unable to function without someone to direct her. The worker said the woman was underweight and had a number of problems, and she was treated worse than an animal. She said that the woman is now living independently. And guys, in this next news story, a notorious criminal has been found guilty of a plot to smuggle spies into prisons throughout the country. Larry Barnett Jr. was described as the ringleader behind a lucrative operation to soak fake legal letters in the Class B drug. His father's garden shed was used as a base for the documents to be created using the logo of a Birmingham law firm, which actually had nothing to do with the criminal enterprise. Following a trial, Barnett Jr. previously was yesterday found guilty of conspiracy to convey drugs into a prison. After the verdict was announced, the prosecutor, Robert Forrest, told Birmingham Crown Court that the defendant had previously been jailed for 15 years in 2011 for conspiracy to rob and firearms offences, but most recently he was sentenced to 21 years in February 2020 for being part of a gang who raided cash machines at convenience stores. The defendant's father and his stepmother were also involved in the drug smuggling plot and both admitted the same charge. Barnett Jr. was found guilty and sentence was adjourned until the start of October. Spice, also known as Mamba, is a synthetic cannabinoid typically manufactured in laboratories outside of the UK but imported in illegally, either in powder or liquid form. It can be used in various different ways. Prosecutor opening the case against Barnett Jr. early this month said the versatility of this means that it can be sprayed onto paper or soaked into paper, and in turn, when the paper has been impregnated with that drug, you can ingest that paper and still experience the effects of the drug. So for dealers up and down the country seeking to supply prisoners with drugs, you may think this drug may be extremely appealing to them simply to spray onto bits of paper and sending those letters into prison. That's the way drugs were being supplied into prisons in 2019. That's what this case is about. Prosecution said Larry Barnett Jr. was a ringleader of a group of people who had all engaged in the common purpose of sending letters laced with the drug spice into various prisons between March and December 2019. The jury was told letters were marked up as legal correspondence, which attracted even more stringent checking procedures at prison. A total of 15 letters were intercepted, and even though spice could be obtained for pretty cheap, a single sheet of A4 could be worth as much as £300 inside a prison. Barnett Sr. and his stepmother received around £50,000 worth of cash deposits in their bank between March and December 2019, despite neither declaring any income to HMRC, and many other transactions could be directly linked to serving prisoners or their relatives. So guys, there's a couple of stories coming out from the streets of the UK. Once again, if you already haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel and please give this video a little like. I'd appreciate it, and also leave a comment as well and I'll respond back to you. It's your boy GT. Keep it locked, keep it real.